really good at using family members against one another. Sometimes they go as far as recruiting members of the family of an opposition leader just to discredit them. And in some case, they go full ballistic on the members of the family of these opposition leaders by arresting them, by abusing their family members, their children, their spouses. So it comes with a lot of fear when people realize that a member of their family is criticizing the government. Their response comes out of trauma, out of witnessing the way the government responds to people who are vocal against them. In my particular case, I will say I was a bit lucky. Lucky in the sense that my father himself has been a dissident for many decades before I was born, and my grandfather before him was also a dissident for many years before he was born. As a result, we have a track record in my dad's family of standing against autocracy, standing against dictatorship under the Nyasingbe and colonialism when the French administration was still in power. As a result, I had at least a moral support in my father. But unfortunately, it wasn't the case with the other extended family or even close siblings. There is this legitimate fear against the reaction of the government because they are convinced the regime will crush you, and they have succeeded at doing that in the past. Maybe it comes from a position of love, but I also feel like it comes a lot from a position of lack of courage and a position of cowardice.
Yeah, totally.
Hello, welcome to the show. My name is Rodolfo Okonkwo. Thank you for joining us. Today is the finals of the World Cup. I know most of you are looking forward to watching the game between Argentina and Spain. But on 90 Minutes Africa, the show must go on. As military coups, anti-French protests, economic realignments, and new geopolitical structure reshape French-controlled West Africa, what exactly is changing in the relationship between France and its former African colonies? Has French neocolonialism ended, evolved, or merely changed its face? How does that play into the new scramble for Africa? Joining us for this important conversation is Farida Bemba Nabourema. I know I will butcher the name, Nabourema, one of Africa's most prominent voices on democracy, human rights, a Pan-Africanist, and a writer. And he's very involved in the struggle against authoritarianism in Africa. She's a Togolese writer, human rights defender, and a Pan-Africanist. He has been at the forefront of pro-democracy movements in Togo since her teenage years. She is the co-founder and former executive director of the Togolese Civil League and the founder of the internationally recognized Faure Must Go movement, which has become a rallying cry for democracy resistance in Togo. Through hundreds of articles, public lectures, and international advocacy campaigns, she has challenged dictatorship, corruption, foreign domination, and the unfinished business of Africa's liberation. She's the author of several books, including The Pressure of Oppression. She has been recognized all over the world for her work in democracy promotion and human rights advocacy. She's joining us to examine the structure, the changing structure of French influence in Africa, the rise of a new form of dependency and resistance, and the role of African elite in trying to free Africa in the 21st century. Currently, She's the director of Togolese Civil Rights Center. Please join me in welcoming to the show Farida Bemba Nabourema. Farida, welcome to the show. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, did I? How do you? I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name properly.
So it's Farida Nabourema.
Nabourema. Okay,
Yes.
Nabourema. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. We let me first confess that we from the English-speaking, the so-called Anglophone English-speaking parts of Africa, we don't have any idea what's happening at the French-speaking parts. And we're neighbors. Nigeria is surrounded by French-speaking countries. But we have no idea. Anybody telling you that we understand, we don't. So we're happy to have you. And
Thank
we
you.
hope that today you will help us to understand what is going on in that region of Africa. So let me start with, there was this meeting that was organized by French president. I think it was it wasn't in Nairobi in Kenya, and African leaders all went there. When you see something like that, what goes through your mind?
I will say that for this particular one, I was, I wasn't as disappointed as in the previous ones. And I'll state the reason. The reason is that the French government has held French Africa summits for decades now, and they always take place on French territory. This is the first time that they decided to hold the new branded version of the summit in Africa. But most interestingly, in a part of Africa that they didn't used to have an influence on, in a country that is not a former colony of France, which is specifically Kenya. And why I call it a victory is because that summit is the purest proof and manifestation of France being kicked out of its former colonies once and for all, to a point where it decided to build new alliances on the continent. And as a matter of fact, 2 years ago in 2024, to be precise, the French government presented the new geostrategic approach that French will have towards rebuilding trust and relationship with African countries. And they acknowledge that they have lost influence in their former colonies, which they used to exercise full control over, and the manifested interest in approaching non-Francophone countries, more specifically some English-speaking countries and Portuguese-speaking countries like Angola and Mozambique. So on one aspect, people can be frustrated that the French government comes to Africa and convene our head of state in an African country. But on the other side, for us to even get there, it took years of resistance from people from different other countries where France has full control. And it is proof that change is happening and that change is already affecting how geopolitics is running on this continent.
So a good example of what you're saying, Nigeria's president goes to France almost every 3 months.
Yeah.
We don't know the relationship. We know that when there was a problem in Niger Republic, that the French government was pushing Nigeria to intervene. So what? How do you say? You mentioned that there are changes. What kind of changes in terms of French influence in Africa? Is it the way it's characterized out there that young people in French-speaking countries are kicking against even having the French in their countries? Is that what is happening?
It is far beyond that. It goes above just saying we don't want the French anymore, they should go. It is rather an awakening of our masses that has decided to take over its own destiny in its own hands. It is the failure of the regimes the French put into power that have ruled over many of those countries for decades, in violence and contributed in looting resources and rendering those countries the poorest on the continent. For a very long time, on the list of the 10 poorest countries in Africa, 8 of them were Francophone. And that reason is because we have not really decolonized in the true sense of term in our countries that are considered as Francophone. A term that I actually detest as a person, even though this sounds like a strong word, because the Europeans have colonized people in different parts of the world. They started among themselves before exporting their colonialism, but nowhere else on this planet do the people they colonize use an identity that is characterized by the language of their colonial power. Asians were also colonized by Europeans, but the English-speaking Asians don't call themselves Anglophone Asians. The one who are colonized by France, like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, don't call themselves Francophone Asians. Same thing in the Middle East. The Lebanese don't call themselves Francophone Arabs. The Egyptians don't call themselves Anglophone Arabs. And Latin Americans, the Haitians don't call themselves in the Caribbean Francophone Caribbean and Anglophone Caribbean. It is specifically us Africans that have acquired that built identity, which beyond paper means absolutely nothing and is one of the most ridiculous identities ever. Because the only thing it does is to ensure we continue to consume from a specific market and limit us to only deal with people from a specific group The irony of it is that when you actually look at the demographics of our countries and our constitutions, the people who even speak that foreign language don't make up the majority of the population. The language can be official, but you go to a country like Togo, more than half of our people don't speak fluent French. And I can tell you for sure that even the educated Togolese, the moment they leave the classroom or the court, they don't speak French among themselves. We go to our markets, we're using local languages. You even go to the hospital, we use local languages. And I used to say something very funny. We go to school, we use French in the classroom. The moment we step out of the classroom and are buying food in the compound, we are using the local language. So technically, being called Francophone is even an abuse of term. We are not Francophones. And ridiculously, while the colonial borders divided us, the linguistic barrier divided us even more. Across our countries, you find same ethnic groups. You have more than 30 million people speaking Yoruba in Nigeria, but you have close to 10 million of them speaking it in Benin, close to 5 million speaking it in Togo. However, the Nigerian Yoruba thinks that the Togolese Yoruba is not his brother because that one is a Francophone and I am an Anglophone. And same thing with the Ewe that you find in Ghana and in Togo. 33 million people speak it overall. But the Togolese will rather mingle with an Ivorian, which is another country away, than they will mingle with their brothers in Ghana when they actually do speak the same local languages. So those colonial barriers prevented us from even trading properly among ourselves, interacting among ourselves, building structures among ourselves and exchanging and ensuring that we consume from a specific market. Like you enter the vast majority of those countries called Francophone countries for a long time. The brands that dominate across the market are French brands, whether it is for appliances, for cars, for home supplies, and any other goods, we purchase them directly from France. Then you move to the border, they purchase there from an English-speaking country. So it is a market economy that was built to keep us divided so that we can continue consuming from specific people. And we as Africans have adopted to a level where we even build institutions to represent those categories of people. Even within the ECOWAS, you have a sub-ECOWAS called BCAO, which is limited to the Francophone countries. UEMOA, they have their own bank, BCAO. And the UEMOA zone is the Francophone countries within the West African zone. So we have subdivisions across those colonial borders. But what I want to say, however, is that the vast majority of our countries were ruled by regimes that the French put in power right after our independence. Because at first they realized that they couldn't continue with the war on colonialism, like it started in Cameroon and Algeria. In Cameroon, mind you, more than 250,000 people were killed between 1958 and 1961. In Algeria, more than 1.2 million people were killed between 1956 and 1962. All because they wanted their independence. And then you have other independence movements across French countries. So they realized that, hey, let us give them the independence, but give it on paper. Now, the countries that actually had the nationalists take power, like it was the case in Togo, Sylvanus Olympio, Modibo Keïta in Mali, Sékou Touré in Guinea. They tried everything possible to topple them. The first one was Sylvanus Olympio of Togo, who was killed in 1963, barely 2 years and a half after our independence, exactly a month after he had the Togolese parliament pass a law establishing the creation of the Togolese franc. And before he decided to remove Togo from the CFA franc, he was killed, and he was the first president to be assassinated in a coup in Africa in 1963. Followed that, they also toppled Modibo Keïta in Mali and forced Mali to come back into the CFA. They attempted assassination on Sékou Touré in Guinea 8 times, and they failed, and he eventually died, but they replaced him by one of their folks. In countries like Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon, they put their stooges in power, Houphouët-Boigny, Sédar Senghor, and Ahidjo, who eventually was replaced by Paul Biya. Same thing in Gabon and Congo-Brazzaville. So the French ensured that they put their own people in power, and they gave them full assurance that they can remain in power for as long as they keep the French interests intact. So a lot of those countries are mineral rich, but the reality is that the data is showing that less than 2% of the value of the minerals that are extracted in our countries is given to the nation. They still are resources in a variety of ways. Number one, by first of all, misassessing the amount of mineral that they are exporting out of the countries. Number two, by creating offshore companies that buy the same minerals at a very low price, a price that is far more than 80% below market price. They sell it back to those companies. Now those companies in the offshore, in other tax jurisdictions are the ones that buy it and eventually sell it on the global market. That's how they have sustained this system for a long time. And most importantly, they have done so through military repression. The French had a total of 17 military bases in Africa. And funny enough, more than 80% of the French army was stationed in Africa. Like literally 85% of the French army, soldier men, were stationed in Africa.
The country's army?
Yes, 85% of French military was stationed in Africa up till recently. And they still have a huge amount that is still in some African countries because they still have bases operating. So they impose what they call military agreements between us and their nations, which normally is supposed to protect the nation in case of invasion. But those armies only intervene when citizens are standing up against those dictatorial regimes that they have imposed on them. When we had an uprising in Togo in 1983, the French president then sent those military to rescue Eyadema. When the Cameroonian tried as well, they sent their military to rescue them from to rescue Paul Biya. In the Central African Republic, they did the same. In Congo, they did the same to bring back Sassou Nguesso after he was removed by coup, and so on and so forth. So their militaries are on the continent to ensure the leaders they want remain in power. And for as long as those leaders are delivering on their promise, which is to allow French businesses control the entire economy and have full control over our natural resources, they can stay in power for as long as they want. Eyadema died in power after 38 years. Houphouët-Boigny died in power after 32 years, I believe. Bongo died in power after 42 or 41 years. Idriss Déby died in power after 30 years. And there are many other examples. So Paul Biya has been there now for over 40 years as well. So the French have ensured that there is a continuity of colonialism and we are only independent on paper. And unfortunately, while people are saying that over the recent years, Africans are waking up and they are kicking them out, it's not like if citizens from those countries have been sleeping for the past 50 years and 2-3 years ago, they woke up and like, oh, we don't want the French anymore. There has been continuous resistance for decades. just that those resistances have not been televised. People have been fighting, protesting, being killed, being abducted consistently from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s to the 2000s. It's only now that they are reaching a level where there is more awareness about it because we have the internet and because we have social media, and also because a new generation of people are coming in and are deciding to be more defiant of the regimes. But the citizens of those countries have not been sleeping across the year. There have been I have read about and interacted with some of the most some of the most brave activists from those countries, and these struggles have been going on for decades. One of the ones that we didn't really pay attention to was the crisis in Cote d'Ivoire, when the French entirely portrayed Laurent Gbagbo as a dictator who has been in power after 2 terms and refused to leave. But what they never say, after Gbagbo only spent 10 years in power, what they never say that 2 years after Gbagbo took power from the French puppet that was removed by coup, they sent the French military to topple him. They did a coup against Laurent Gbagbo when he traveled. He was on a political trip, diplomatic trip in Italy. The Ivorian, 1.2 million Ivorians took the street, marched to the airport, and asked Gbagbo to land back into the country. And Gbagbo was received back into the country. Then they unleashed a full war against Laurent Gbagbo with rebels that were sponsored by Blaise Compaoré, the one that killed Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso. And those rebels completely occupied the north of Burkina Faso with the support of the French, of Cote d'Ivoire, with the support of the French army. For 5 years, they couldn't have an election. And eventually, when they did, Gbagbo said he was running again. And they said, no, you can't run again because the constitution said you cannot spend more than 10 years in power. But then Gbagbo was like, we haven't done elections in the past more than 5 years because of the war. So this is supposed to be my second term. But Alassane Ouattara, who has been one of the strongest allies and supporters of French colonialism on the continent, was the one the French wanted to put into power in Cote d'Ivoire by force, even though it has been proved that this man was born Burkinabe, studied in the US on a scholarship of Burkina Faso, worked at the World Bank with the nationality of Burkina Faso, but he was imposed on Cote d'Ivoire as a head of state because he's one of the supporters of Blaise Compaoré and one of the people that the French has prepared to lead Cote d'Ivoire, which at the time was the most financially prosperous country in the French countries, in the French colonies. As a result, Gbagbo was presented to the world as a tyrant who, after 2 terms, refused to leave power, and the French military entered the presidency of Cote d'Ivoire, bombed it, and captured Laurent Gbagbo, sent him to The Hague for trial. He spent 10 years at The Hague in a fake trial. Eventually, The Hague and the ICC could not find him guilty, and they ended up clearing all the charges against him. It was a French manipulation. And ironically, that same man, Ouattara, that the French said is the democratic one who is going to ensure that democracy returns to Cote d'Ivoire, after spending 2 terms, being elected twice through shadowy elections because he had all of his opposition leaders locked up, change the constitution and run for a 3rd term, then run for a 4th term, and the French are still supporting him and are quiet about it. So it is that ridiculousness of them identifying whoever is opposed to the French rule as being a dictator, even if you have spent less than 10 years in power, and those that they themselves support, like the Paul Bias, the Nyassimbes, the Bongos, can stay there for 50 years if they want, and not a single word about their dictatorship is spread across the news and make headlines globally. So time has come where, as citizens from different countries, we are communicating among ourselves. The people from Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Togo, Senegal, they communicate more. They see the reality, and they are no longer willing to tolerate that. So it's not something that happened overnight. It is something that has been groomed through years of resistance. It's a culmination of that resistance that we are seeing today with those coups that are removing French puppets here and there on the continent.
Thank you so much for this elaborate description, because I know that your family, your father, your grandfather, they've been part of that resistance for many years. So it's not something that just started. And it's good that our people are listening to this, because sometimes we at the English part of Africa, we tend to not have patience. You know, if something is not changing, we tend to think that it's hopeless. You hear a lot of Nigerians say that that country cannot be fixed. But look at what you just described about what's happening in the French-speaking parts of Africa. That they've been there fighting, and they don't even have the media exposure that English-speaking countries do have more than the French around the world. All right. So you talked about, I guess that Franc-Afrique is not a good word now in. Yeah. Is it still something that people use?
Yeah, people still use it, but the system itself is no longer as strong as it used to be. But the word is still valid.
It's still valid. Now, when you were talking, I was thinking about, are there differences in English-speaking part of Africa in terms of the influence of the French, the English, or the British or the Americans in those English-speaking part of Africa? We can point at someone like Museveni. Museveni is still there, and they are supporting Museveni. And there are many places where you even look at Nigeria, look at the issues with the presidency of Bola Tinubu. They are protecting him, they are not trying to say, but as long as you are not playing, you are playing to the game they want you to play, they are okay with that. So I don't think there's a lot of differences, but I'm sure.
There are still a lot of differences, and allow me to point them to you.
Okay.
I don't think that the English-speaking countries signed what they call the Colonial Pact. We Francophone countries were obliged to sign the Colonial Pact. The Colonial Pact comes with there are a set of rules that the French government drafted, which they have been using actually since the 18th century when Haitians kicked them out of Haiti to create the first Black nation in the Americas. So they did the same thing to Haiti, and they did the same thing to us. So they said, you guys want your freedom, but you have to pay us back for everything we have invested in your colony. So for Haiti, they calculated the infrastructures and all the Haitians that were liberated through slavery and asked the Haitian government to pay for it. And when they refused, they placed embargoes on them and eventually coerced them into paying them that money, which is worth more than $50 billion when you equate it to today's dollar value. And that completely destroyed Haiti's economy. What they did to Africa was similarly the same. They build every single thing they invested in our countries and say you have to pay it back. When Togo forced its independence, Togo was the first country to take France to the UN in 1947 to demand its independence when Sylvanus Olympio spoke at the UN in 1947, right after World War II, and said, we want our independence. So it took more than 10 years of struggle, and eventually the UN agreed to do a referendum in Togo and ask the people of Togo to decide whether they want to continue French colonialism or they want to be free. And 97% of the people of Togo voted no to colonialism. And that's how Togo gained its independence. When Togo gained its independence after the no in 1958, the French came up with the bill and said, you want your independence, then pay us back for every infrastructure we have built. The roads, the schools, the ports, everything, pay us back. And Sylvanus Olympio said, okay, I'm going to sacrifice 60% of our national budget in 1959 and pay you everything back. They were actually shocked that they would. And Sylvanus Olympio did that, paid them back. And 1 year later, 1960, Togo got its independence. And Sylvanus Olympio said, not only we are paying you back, we want out of the currency you built in 1946 called the CFA, we want to build our own currency. That's what sent them to killing Sylvanus Olympio, because they were afraid that if Sylvanus Olympio succeeded, other African countries will also want to do the same thing and they will lose their power. Why? Because the CFA was created to give France geopolitical relevance. In the aftermath of World War II, most Western countries in European countries were broke. It took the US Marshall Plan to rescue most of their economies. But they decided to build a financial institution that will allow them to have exercise financial control over the world. The US dollar was chosen then as the currency of international trade because the US held the largest amount of gold reserve globally. They even acquired more during World War II because they were exchanging weapons for gold. But the French, at the time, their bank was completely broke and their gold reserve was extremely minimal. So they forced all their colonies to move their gold reserve into the Bank of France and created the same model of currency that the Nazi created and imposed on France after the occupation in 1941. So the CFA currency is just an African version of the Nazi currency that the Nazi one that model that the Nazi imposed on the French. And through the Nazi, when the Nazi controlled France, they moved all of their gold into their possession. They minted their money. They determined the value of the French currency. And the French were like, the Germans were really smart. We should have done this as well with our colonies. So they decided to do the same thing. They decided on the value of our currency. They keep our gold. They print our money. And on the central banks of our our countries, the French governors make the decision over our monetary and our fiscal policies. As a result, it's increased the monetary value of France itself, because it's now sitting on the wealth of 15 nations. And that gave France the right to claim to be the most important country in Europe then, and obtain the leadership of the IMF at the time. And to this day, the head of the IMF is either French or another European, and for the World Bank is always an American. So it was geostrategically important for them to have that control. What happened in the Francophone countries, as we call them, is that many leaders realized that the French currency was a trap and that we couldn't continue this way because it was preventing us from building wealth. Imagine you borrow $10 from someone, like from the bank, and when you're about to pay, the bank tells you that the dollar they borrowed you has lost 50% of its value, or not 100% of its value. Now you owe them double, and there is nothing you can do about it, and it continues to deflate the value of our currencies. So over time, we were non-productive societies. We couldn't invest in infrastructure. We couldn't invest in industrialization. We couldn't even invest in social services because our countries were severely indebted. And the IMF was now coming back with the structural adjustment programs, saying you have to cut government expenditure, meaning you cut social services, you cut the budget on education, you cut the budget on building public facilities, healthcare facilities, you cut the budget on social security. So our countries found themselves having the same type of infrastructure that was left in place since the colonial era, without having the resources to build new ones. And of course, with population growth and those resources depreciating, the citizens are finding themselves in more and more precarious condition. So what we have actually witnessed with the French is a calculated way of ensuring they continue milking the system. In the other countries that are considered Anglophone, it does still happen. The Americans and the Brits have a lot of power in those countries, whether you talk about Nigeria or South Africa or even Kenya. They still have a lot of control through their multinational corporations that control the oil companies and so on and so forth. But there is not a single paper that requires the Nigerians to keep their gold reserve in the Bank of England. And there is nothing that requires the Kenyan to only be able to trade with England. The colonial pact requires also what they call the first right of refusal. Before we choose to sell our minerals to any other country in the world, the French must decide if they want it first or not. And it's only if the French refuse that we can now go to China or Russia to sell the same minerals. So those colonial pacts literally played against us. So even though the colonial powers still have influence in the English-speaking countries and play a lot of role in politics and sometimes maintaining the regime in place, it is not as pernicious as we see them in Francophone countries.
Yeah, I agree. The reason why I ask is that in Nigeria, for instance, after the independence in 1960, we signed a defense pact with Britain. It was only in 1962 that Nigerian students at the University of Ibadan protested, and Nigeria had to withdraw from that defense pact. So they tried the same thing, similar things. And you know that in Nigeria, if you want to run for president, you have to go to Chatham House and explain to them why you want to run for president, and they have to vet you. So I understand the severity is more in the French-speaking countries than in the English-speaking countries. But you know, what we learned in history was that the British, they use what they call indirect rule when they were controlling the English-speaking parts of Africa. But in the French, they use direct rule. What is that? What does that really mean in actual sense?
So during the colonial era, the British still left some level of power to the local chiefs and traditional rulers to still have some level of control over their people. In the case of Francophone countries, they literally killed most of our traditional kings because most of them were opposed to the French colonialism in the first place. They created new chiefhoods themselves, which they called chef canton, and canton means counties, and traditionally we don't have counties in our countries. They now impose people into communities as their traditional rulers, and those traditional rulers were directly aiding who they call the commandant de cercle, who was a colonial administrator in ensuring they were collecting taxes from the people and also executing any punishments that they plan for those who disobey the colonial administration. So the French ensure that they have direct control over the communities, unlike the British, who still left some level of leverage to the traditional rulers of the countries where they were exercising, that they were colonizing at the time. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I just have to mention that in some parts of Nigeria, they did the same thing. Yeah. There are some places where they had to depose whoever was the king and put in somebody else. In the Southeast, for instance, we didn't have kings that were prominent then, but they created that just like the French. So, all right, it's very important to touch on these things because most people don't understand how we got to where we are today. So let's move on a little bit and talk about the resistance, the current one, where you have military officers. Most of them were trained in France, rising up to take over governments and kick the French out. Do you support that?
Do I support what exactly?
The military intervention as a way to free these African countries.
Okay. All right. Sorry. That question requires approaching things with a lot of nuance. Do I support militaries ruling African countries? Yes and no. Yes, if only African citizens and African people themselves want militaries to rule them. Because democracy is not just about saying the people decide who, just saying that we're having elections and a civilian is taking over. If the citizens of one country said, the civilians of our nations are too vulnerable and we want a military to rule us, then it's still democracy because the people decided that they want the military to rule them. So we should give the opportunity of the citizen to decide what type of leadership that they want. Now, having militaries or any other kind of institutional leaders take over political leadership without consensus from the people, without the right of the people to intervene and oversee how they are ruling the country, without any accountability towards the people, is definitely a no, whether it is a military or not. The reality is that on our continent, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, if you want to put it like that, and the mass process of democratization, we were only sold one type of democracy, which is the European model, and that was adapted to the American system as well, let's say the Western model. But who decided that it's only the Western model of democracy that can be considered democracy? Who decided that it's only the mechanism through which Westerners hold their leaders accountable that can only be the viable forms of mechanism to hold government accountable in any parts of the world? Before Europeans came, there were different forms of governance that existed throughout Africa, not in specific countries because these are countries were created on paper at the Berlin Conference, but there were people, the Oromo in Ethiopia, the Chwana in Botswana, even a part of the Igbo culture in Nigeria, the Akan in Ghana, the Mandinka in Mali. In Mali, they even had an elaborate charter, which was the very first human rights charter recorded in history, that was published in the 13th century, which abolished slavery in the Mali Empire and also ensured protection to the people. So there were already systems of governance that were ingrained in consensus, ingrained in citizenry participation, ingrained in accountability towards the people that the Europeans erased through colonialism, because colonialism is not compatible with democratic governance. Colonialism is built on extraction, is built on domination and exploitation. So they erased those systems of governance and they imposed theirs to us. And when they imposed theirs to us and we still resisted and eventually got our independence, they were not comfortable with the leaders we chose. They sent people to assassinate them and still impose their leaders, because at the time they were prioritizing the survival of their ideology, which was capitalism. So for them, it was a war against communism. So whatever we can do to maintain the communists out of the continent and out of our spheres of control, let us do it. they toppled multiple African leaders and killed many of them on the simple suspicion that they may have ties with Russia and the communists. They toppled them in Somalia, toppled them in Congo, DRC, Congo, Brazzaville as well, toppled them in other parts of the continent, just on the suspicion that they may be having ties with the communists. Then, when the wall of Berlin fell, all of a sudden, they found a new passion. You must all democratize. The same leaders they put into power, they said we need to have democracy. They engineered systems of democracy that they claim will make us democratic by pushing us into what they call elections. Have elections, choose your leader. But ensuring that those elections were never free and fair. But whoever comes out of those elections, if it is somebody that they like, then it is the process that is fair and transparent. If it is somebody that they do not like, then automatically they create tension, fund wars and rebellions, and intervene in those countries. So we found ourselves since the 1990s having a lot of civilian, theocratic, and authoritarian regimes across the continent, feudalistic regimes. And we are being told that removing the militaries is the solution and having civilians. But what happens when civilians are put in power and they are ruling exactly like the military rulers during the dictatorial regimes? No free and fair elections, no freedom of the press, no freedom of speech, no freedom of association. Anybody who says anything against the president is assassinated or arrested or exiled. When we have civilians committing such abuse and atrocities on their people, how do you call that a democracy? So democracy is not limited to a civilian being in power, and having a military being in power does not automatically translate to dictatorship either. It is about whether the citizens in those countries are free, can exercise their civic liberties, can participate in their governance, can hold their governments accountable through the institutions that the state has established. Democracy without freedom, civil rights and liberties, and democracy without accountability can never be democracy. So on that premise, I will say, I am not for militaries ruling countries, just like I am not for civilians ruling countries. I am for people who respect the civil rights of their citizens ruling countries, and people who can be held accountable by their citizens ruling their countries, regardless of whether they are religious leaders, political leaders, military leaders. It doesn't matter. It is a system of accountability and governance at the end of the day that matter. Are the voices of the people respected? Can the people choose to remove that leader if he's failing them? Those are the mechanisms through which I determine whether a leadership is worth it or not.
Thank you so much. You touched on something I wanted to explore more. You said if the people choose to have a military leadership in their country, it should be allowed. Have you talked about the mechanism? Is there any mechanism where the people can choose to be governed by the military? Is there anything in place at this time?
At this time, it depends on the countries and it depends on the context. Like I said again, we have been told that the Western model of elections is seen as the only viable form of democracy. But some will tell you that the American democracy is flawed because at the end of the day, the Americans can choose who they want and the Electoral College can still decide who runs the country at the end of the day. So in some countries, there is not another system that I can say in Africa today that allows citizens to make that decision, which is why I have reservation over the current militaries that are ruling across Africa. Just the same way I have reservation over the civilians that are also ruling, that were selected through elections that everybody knows was unfair and was not transparent. The reality is, how do we ensure we build the institutions that are accountable to the people, that allows the people to define their type of democracy and the way they want to choose their leadership? As crazy as it might sound, although I acknowledge that China is an authoritarian regime, the way the Chinese choose their leader, I believe, is far more rigorous and democratic than the way we choose our leaders here. Somebody cannot just wake up because he's the son of someone and becomes a leader in China. It takes a certain level of political journey that the person must, like, their political criterias, their intellectual criterias, academic criterias, leadership criterias that eventually lead to the leader of the Chinese Communist Party being chosen by its people. And the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party are not completely safe from public scrutiny. Corruption is not tolerated in any form in China. You are an official, you are found accountable for corruption, you are executed. Even if your father is a billionaire, it doesn't matter. We don't see the same thing in our countries. So we have a lot of fraudsters who, because they managed to collect 10% in an election, claim to be democratic leaders or leaders of democratic nation, when in reality, we don't see that manifesting at the grassroots level with the citizens. So that's why I say we have to nuance the situation. It is not military regime against civilian regime. A civilian regime can be authoritarian, just like a military regime can be authoritarian. A civilian regime can be democratic, just like a civilian regime a military regime can also be democratic. It's all about the systems in place to ensure accountability, transparency for the people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. In Nigeria, when things are difficult, we see people sometimes protesting, saying they want the military to come back. Mm-hmm. And people like you in the civil rights movement and defending rights, we say, no, we don't want the military because we know their history, what they did in the past in Nigeria. And also in Nigeria, most times at the beginning, when the military, whenever they take over, people come out on the street to celebrate and say they are here to liberate us. But at the end, they find out that they're not even better than the people that they removed. So being that we don't have any system of measuring, and the military, they don't come out and say, do you want us or you don't want us? They just come in and take over. And people pray that they will be better than the people they removed. Knowing that, do you think that the people in the Sahel region, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, that they are doing better than the people they removed?
It will be very hypocritical of me or anyone to say yes or no to that question. You don't just decrete that the leader is doing well. You conclude based on data and the metrics. You have to be able to run a comparative study and analysis of what life was before the military regime and life is under the military regime. So there are certain sets of metrics that allows you to understand if they are doing better or not. You look at the in French, we say indice humain de développement. I think in English, that's human development index.
Indexes, yeah.
If I'm not wrong. You look at the level of public infrastructure being built. You look at the GDP per capita, not the overall GDP. You look at access to resources, basic needs being met by the people. Then you can conclude, they are doing better or things have worsened. But even under those circumstances, you still need to disaggregate the data because the political situation and the security situation of the country today may not be the same as 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So you cannot use data today and compare it to an era when there was no jihadist group occupying 40% of the nation and leading to millions of people becoming internally displaced and not having an income anymore. So you have to disaggregate the data before you can lead to a conclusion and say, hey, they are doing terribly well or they are doing really bad. I also warn people against that trend of literally turning leaders into social media influencers. It's not because you are seeing videos every week of people saying this particular leader is doing an amazing job that the life of the people on the ground is what is being seen online. We have to still be aware of propaganda. And we can only tell by approaching those institutions that can measure that growth, but also hearing from the people of those countries. I do not live in any of those countries. I haven't visited any of them in the past, I think, 6 or 7 years, even though I've visited each of them, but not in the past 6 or 7 years. So I cannot come here from a political position because I'm a Pan-Africanist and claim that these leaders are doing fantastic because they are using a language that I subscribe to politically. It will be dishonest from my part and completely unfair to the people if in the eventuality of those leaders not really doing what we believe is happening from what we are seeing on social media.
Do we as Africans have the institutions that can measure what you just said?
We do.
And report what kind of, can you give me an example?
You have an organization like Afrobarometer. They are African run. They conduct such research all the time. They come up with those surveys. I have interacted with them on different projects in the past. We do have institutions that actually measure those things. We have ISS, the Institute of Security Studies, that is also based in Johannesburg. Afrobarometer, I believe, is based in Ghana. There are a couple of institutions out there.
Have they reported on those countries, and what are they saying?
They have on different things, though, because the data is not just like globalized, it's per specific topic. They have in some fields, in some fields there have been improvements. In some other fields, things have gotten really bad. But in the areas where things have gotten really bad, there is also a tie to the ongoing security crisis with the jihadist groups. So we cannot automatically say that things have gotten bad because the military leaders came in place, but things have gotten bad because the jihadist movement has become stronger over the past years. And their funding mechanism has also increased as they are getting more resources and are waging literally war against those nations. So things are not that happy, jolly in those countries. Thousands of people are being killed. People are living in horrible situations in IDP camps because these countries are fighting for their survival from the jihadist groups as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me go to a different direction. Islamic, you talked about Islamic fundamentalists and terrorism across Africa, especially the French-speaking parts of Africa. We have it in Nigeria. Most people understand that. How is it different from, let's go back to history. How did the French handle the division? I'm thinking that most African countries had Islam come in at certain points. You can use any country as an example, Burkina Faso, Togo, or any country, Mali. And how did it interact with the ethnic groups that were there before? What is the current situation? The ethnic groups, the Islam, which one did Islam suppress the ethnic culture?
First of all, let's rectify something. All of these nations are majority Muslim countries. Mali, more than 95% are Muslim. Niger, like I think it's 97% that is Muslim. They are already majority Muslim countries, and these have been countries whose people have been in Islamized. In French, you say Islamisé. I don't know if the right expression.
Islamized, yeah.
Islamized for centuries, since the times of the Mali Empire, then the Songhai Empire. So they are already Muslim communities.
So the cultural differences are wiped out? Does it mean that still you don't know the people who are from different ethnic groups in
You do.
Okay.
You still have multiple ethnic groups. You have the Mandinka, you have the Fula, you have people, you have the Zarma, you have multiple ethnic groups in all of those countries, but it doesn't change the fact that they are almost all Muslims. But one thing we don't realize is even within Islam, there are subdivisions, there are subgroups, there are schools of thoughts in Islam. You have the Wahhabis there, you have the Salafis there, you have the Shia there. So there are subdivision, and what we are noticing is some subdivision of Islam fighting to impose their version of Islam on everybody else. So it's not just a matter of, the Muslims are coming and fighting those who are not Muslim. They are also fighting Muslims that do not subscribe to their type of Islam in the way they practice it. So that is the reality that we are facing. And when it comes to the jihadist groups in West Africa, some of them are Wahhabis, the majority are Wahhabis, some of them are Salafis as well. Yeah.
So how did the French, so I'll give an example. In Nigeria, the British, when they took control of the territory, they were able to create this structure where you have in the Muslim north, they allow Sharia Muslim practices. In the Christian south, they have common law and stuff like that. How did the French handle the Islam in the structure of those countries before they left?
The French really, in short, they did not intervene in terms of imposing a religion on those countries. I will say that something played in a little bit into our favor, if I can call it that way. So the government of France itself, through their French Revolution and their revolt against the monarchy, went through a set of reforms in their political structure that led them to being what they call a secular nation. And that secularism was practiced in most of their colonies, which is why in my country, Togo, we consider ourselves a secular nation. And even some of the Muslim countries that have a majority Muslim population, like Senegal, I think they have 92% Muslim. Senegal constitutionally is a secular nation. It's not an Islamist country, despite that. So many of our countries inherited that separation of state from religion and secularism in our political structures. So there was no real attempt to change the religion of the people in those citizens or to impose a religious leadership onto them. So I wouldn't say that the French really intervened when it comes to religion in those areas. However, what has kick-started the crisis in the Sahel was the French government and their allies' decision to assassinate Gaddafi and occupy Libya. And many of those supporters who had massive artillery and weapons fled Libya and came into the Sahel and started occupying this land and decided to take over those areas of Africa and establish their caliphate in those areas. And now we have been fighting them for over a decade now.
All right. We'll take a break in a moment, and then when we'll come back, we will get people who are watching involved in the conversation. We're also going to talk about your book. I see some of them online. They are in French. Are they? Do you have English versions of the book?
There is only one that is translated in English. That is Melancholies of the Oppressed, but the other two are in French.
Okay. So, but before we go, let me ask you this question about the Sahel, that region, and what is going on. You mentioned propaganda. How will regular people, knowing this age of AI, and how do they differentiate what is real and what is not real? There are videos I've seen of Captain Ibrahim Traore speaking English. I don't know if you know. Does he speak English?
He doesn't.
Okay, so how will people be able to know what is real and what is not real in today?
It's very difficult because the videos that are English, not all of them are doctored. There are tools today that allow immediate translation, automatic translation, where it uses his voice and translates directly into English, and you would think he's speaking English. But then some videos are just completely staged by people who have found a new hero in him, and whatever comes to their mind as something exciting, they invent and attribute it to Ibrahim Traore. So it is hard to say that all the videos that we see that are not true are automatically built by Ibrahim Traore's governments and our propaganda tools. There are also individuals that are using this as a way of making an income because he's very popular. So you post a video of Ibrahim Traore there, you get 1 million views, and people are becoming creative and very pernicious in the way they are doing it. Sometimes they'll take infrastructural project from one country, make a video and said, Ibrahim Traore just built this in Burkina Faso, and the citizens from that country come and say, no, this was in Benin, this has nothing to do with Burkina Faso, or this was in Cote d'Ivoire, or this was in Senegal. So there are a lot of content creators that are also abusing the aura and the popularity that Ibrahim Traore has to create doctors' content that are not always true. And then there are some of them that are actually also true. So it's up to the individuals that are watching to do a bit of due diligence themselves and try to go to credible sites to see if those informations are also on those sites. But if you just want to stumble on anything online and you take it, then you are the type of consumers that those people are targeting to make money.
Does it not tell us that Africans or Black people, because this is beyond Africans, Black people around the world are looking for heroes?
They have always looked for heroes. That's the reason why the Jamaicans made Haile Selassie a hero at a time where the people of Ethiopia were starving to death and his monarchy was controlling 80% of the state resources, and citizens in Ethiopia didn't even have the right to look him in the eye. But the Jamaican literally made him a god. We are always looking for heroes. We have bought into the messianic approach of one Moses or Jesus is going to come and liberate us, and we want to believe that so hardly that whenever somebody appears as having a potential of good leadership, automatically we make him the new hero of the Black world.
All right, we will take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the influence of the new saviors of Africa, Russia, China, in Africa, especially in the French-speaking part of Africa. Thank you again for joining us. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're having a wonderful conversation with Farida Nabourema, who is a writer and activist from Togo, joining us to help us understand what's happening within the French-speaking parts of Africa. So let's begin with the Russians. So we have this system or process where we're kicking out the French, kicking out the Western countries, and the Russians are providing security. The Chinese are all over Africa. What do you make of that? Is that going to be the liberation we're looking for, or is that going to be another entity, another group coming in to do exactly the same thing that the West were doing all over Africa?
First of all, I will say that I don't like the term saviors. I don't think any country is out there to save anyone. Even if there is a bilateral relationship between, let's say, Nigeria and Cameroon, they are just neighbors. I don't think one of them is going to save the other one. Human relations and in geopolitics, state relations are only built through interests. Africa has resources, critical minerals and resources that the whole world needs. The world is going through a technological race, and everybody wants to secure access to those critical resources that will determine who will be in control of, who will be winning the technological race. So they are coming to Africa because they have a need. They're not coming to Africa to save us. Now, whether
Farida, sorry, I to stop you, but I wanted to clarify that when people say that, what they actually mean, and this is the angle I'm talking about, where the leaders, they believe that these African leaders are going to be needing another power to support them, so that they, like the French, will not remove them again, because that the French or the West will try to remove them the way they remove Patrice Lumumba, the way they remove Nkrumah, that they need this Russian military or Russian, militia to come and help. And that's the context that people use that.
Okay, the funny thing is that even the relationship between China and those, not China, Russia and those nations started because the French and the American allies blocked these nations from acquiring the military equipment and weapons they needed to fight against the jihadists. They didn't come in and then wake up and say, let us go look for allies to fight the West. People usually don't look at the record of how things evolve in those countries. This military toppled French puppets. Then the French decided to sanction them through the existing mechanism that they have to control the continent and even the regional institutions. As part of the sanctions, they block access to even their cash load. There was a point where in Niger, people have to queue from 4 a.m. in the morning to be able to collect 10,000 CFA from the ATM, which is the equivalent of $18, because the French completely starved them of cash because they control the liquidity. They also cut access to some resources that are critical to the nation, including pharmaceuticals. They put an embargo on them, which prevented other countries from even selling goods and basic goods like sugar and food and to those countries. It is out of finding a solution against the embargoes that the French and their allies imposed on them, that they now went to other countries like Russia, which has the power to support them to some extent. So it didn't start with these leaders coming in and saying, we are coming to kick out the French. It starts with the French doing everything to destroy them from the moment they seize power in order to protect their own puppets. That led to this reaction of them to build new alliances so that their countries can survive. And we are in a geopolitical game. If you have enemies that want to destroy your government, you have no other choice but to find allies that are strong enough to help you resist. It does not mean that it erases all possibility of that ally eventually also turning against you or also wanting to take advantage of you. But it requires some level of awareness from the leaders themselves to be able to guide the relationship they want to establish with those leaders. So my point is that the whole idea of them coming and saving is not what is really happening. It is actual partnership. And here is the most hypocritical thing that I find. In 2022, I believe exactly when the Ukraine war started, the Europeans decided to put an embargo on Russian goods and products. African nations were banned from purchasing agricultural materials from Russia, including wheat. Can you imagine that for Francophone countries, because we have our money in the Bank of France, technically, for every major international export, it passed through the government of France, and it was denominated initially in the French franc, but now in the euro. The French government blocked our nation from buying wheat and agricultural goods from Russia in 2022. They blocked it. Like, we had the money with our own money. They blocked us from buying food from Russia. But guess what? They needed Russian gas at the same time. While they blocked us from buying food from Russia, they were buying gas from Russia themselves. Like, the embargo doesn't apply to their own needs. So it's always other nations and poor people that they use to fight their proxy wars. You see the level of unfairness that there is. The relationship between the Russians and the Chinese and the Europeans, when you look at the numbers, they trade more with the Europeans than they even trade with Africa. But they make it look like Russia and China are taking all over Africa. You have to be careful with these people. But why are they trading with the same Russia and China at the same time, even to the point where the Chinese have full control over their government bonds, because China owns literally a huge chunk of their debt. So everybody can trade, like, they can trade with China, they can trade with Russia, but nobody else should when they say no. It's the hypocrisy that we have to really address, and the infantilization of poorer nations like African nations, poorer in specific contexts, where they decide who is supposed to be the good partner and the bad partner. Yeah.
Some people believe that there is second scramble for Africa, and that there are new players. China is one of the examples they're mentioning. They talk about India also, Turkey. These are new players. It wasn't just the original ones. Do you feel that something like that is going on? And how is it different from the old one?
They are new. We now live in a multipolar world. The US no longer holds the hegemony of the global hegemony over countries. So indeed, there are new players in the world, and it is not just for Africa; it's for even the Europeans themselves. Those countries are also playing in Europe, and also in America. They are also playing in America. The Chinese are investing massively in American businesses, buying a lot of American debt. The Americans are more indebted to China than any other country on the planet. So there are new players everywhere. It is about our leadership playing their card in a proper way to ensure that whatever relationship we build with new countries are not just extractive, because the former model was entirely built on extraction. We take from you and take from you and take from you. But here we discuss, what do you take at what price, and what do we get in return? And over the past decades, we haven't really gotten much in return with our relationship.
bilateral relationship with Europe and a little bit of America, but not as much. America was not as influential in Africa as it was in Latin America, but they were still present by proxy with the Europeans. It is about our leadership to decide how they want to play the game and what kind of measures they put in place to ensure some level of protection to their citizens and their people.
Yeah. Are you people in Togo and Burkina Faso, are they still using CFA?
Yeah.
To today?
Yeah, today. Not a single country has left CFA to this day.
Why? Despite what we know now, because we didn't know these things until recently. Why?
Yeah. Because the process of leaving the CFA is not as straightforward. It goes beyond just saying we don't want the CFA for the countries that are now in the IOS, because the other ones are still ruled by puppets, so they want to be there, they're happy there, they are fine with it. But even the ones that are having that, diplomatic war with the French, there are a certain level of things they need to put into consideration before they create their own currency. France has their gold. They have to find a way to get it back. They cannot build a new currency on paper and on air. France has control of their gold. Their gold is in the Bank of France reserve. There must be a thorough approach to get it back, and it will require them also removing themselves from what they call UEMOA, which is the economic, which is like the reserve bank that controls those nations. It's called BCAO. Those nations form an economic bloc called UEMOA. So it will also change the UEMOA rules. It will require the rewriting of those rules, and it will also affect their current trade with other countries in the region. And our economies are intertwined and interrelated. So it's not like if there is no political will, but it's going to require a certain level of reforms to take place before they are able to do it. They cannot just wake up and say, we want to create our own currency today, because their reserve is in the Bank of France. Like our physical gold, France has the 4th largest gold reserve in the world. Our physical gold is there. Are they going to send militaries there to repatriate it overnight? It can't happen like that. So there has to be a process to get there.
So hearing that, I'm thinking this. The French people might be laughing at African leaders when they do certain things, like say, I'm closing the French embassy in my country. I'm kicking the French military out. Meanwhile, your money is tied to the gold in our country. Is that? This is more complicated than I thought. I would think that I would rather, instead of taking action, that we simply make them angry when I'm not going to achieve anything, the concrete thing, I'll prepare and see. For instance, ECOWAS, they've been trying to have a unifying currency. And from what I read, I don't know if it's true, resistance came from French-speaking part of ECOWAS. And the reason is that France, not because they don't want to, France is pushing them not to do that. I would have thought that the strategic thing...
It's actually worse than that. Actually, there were massive protests against CFA franc between 2017 and 2020. I think COVID kind of like diluted the movement. There were millions of protesters across multiple countries asking the end of the CFA franc. The French, realizing how unpopular the CFA has become and how it's leading to, those protests even preceded the takeover of those countries by these military regimes. Actually, I think it paved the way for it, because people don't document. The world was not watching until these leaders came in. But it started with Mali. There were millions of Malians in the street protesting for over a year before the military took over. The military didn't just wake up and took over. The same thing happened in Burkina Faso. Then the first military that took over was someone that the French themselves put there to ensure they still have control. And that guy was eventually toppled by Ibrahim Traore. So it took a process to even get there. The military came in after months of protests and uprisings from the people of those countries. The reality is that the French, the citizens, like the governments of those countries, they have not, the world is portraying it as, these people just came in and they want to kick the French out. They're determined. Them getting to the point where they are severing relationship with France took actually France taking measures against them. They are fighting back. They are not the one playing the attack. They are literally playing defense here. In every situation, it was the French fighting them and then them resisting back and saying, okay, since you want it the hard way, then let us have it the hard way. Because France was the one that always approached them with those abusive approaches and was always enticing them because they were not happy with the kind of leadership that they have in place. I don't think the French have it easy, but I also don't think that those regimes were hostile with them from the beginning. It was their approach to them that actually led to this situation.
Okay. You are a Pan-Africanist. What does that term mean today? There are people who believe that for Africa to actually start being independent country with its own cultural and structural setup, that we have to go back to Africa before the Berlin Conference, that we have to have a new conference where we decide how Africa should look like. Maybe we start from the empires of the past, but we have to do something different from the path that the Europeans set up for us, the way they created this area and said this is Africa, even the concept of Africa, that we have to question everything. What do you think it should be the way forward? Are we going to go back first before we move forward?
I believe that, first of all, Pan-Africanism is an ideology. I have defined myself as a Pan-Africanist for over 15 years now, from the early stage of my activism, because I subscribe to the ideology of a united and strong Africa as promoted by those who formed the Pan-Africanist movement 200 years ago. Pan-Africanism, interestingly, was not born in Africa. It was born in the diaspora and eventually reached the continent. Pan-Africanism actually has a very simple goal at the basis: the freedom and the unity of African citizens. Freedom, unity, prosperity for African people. So the Pan-African agenda has always changed in regards to the historical and political context of every generation. What Pan-Africanism was 200 years ago is not what it became 100 years ago, is not what it became 50 years ago, and it is not what it is definitely today. 200 years ago, it was about ending slavery completely, the enslavement of Black people everywhere, and bringing back enslaved Africans back to their continent. 100 years ago, it was about ending colonialism completely and ensuring that every country that is colonized on the African continent, that is subjugating Black people, is freed from colonialism. Then after colonialism, it was about ensuring that we regain possession over our resources, because colonialism was replaced to some extent by neocolonialism, where we have flags and anthems and nationalities and passports, but our resources were still being controlled by others. And today we are in a new world as well, where the reality is about ensuring that as Africans, we have political freedom, we have control of our resources, and then we are prosperous as citizens. So Pan-Africanism evolves. I tell people who say Pan-Africanism is impossible because there's no way we can have one country. It was never about the whole of Africa being one country and having just one passport. Even that one is still one of the easiest things to do. Like technically through the AU today, they can decide to start creating African passport. But the unity is beyond having one nationality and one passport. It's about these people living on the continent identifying as one people. It means that whether you are Ewe in Togo, or you are Chwana in Botswana, or you are Oromo in Ethiopia, you identify as African. You understand that our survival as Africans is tied to us protecting one another. That you no longer only subscribe to your micro ethnic nationality identity that were shaped by different things. And that is a process that is going to take a long time. It's something that we have to continuously fight for, and it manifests in different ways. It manifests through culture, it manifests through education, it manifests through economics, and it manifests through politics. Let me give the example of economics today. When you look at African trade, only 15% of our trade is intra-continental. 85% of our trade is extra-continental, meaning that 85% of the things we use on the continent, we buy it outside of the continent. And even for goods that we produce on the continent, we cannot sell it among ourselves because there are a lot of barriers. You have a continent of 46 currencies that do not talk to one another at the bank level. So technically, our currencies are not interchangeable. You have to convert them to a foreign currency before rebuying the other country's local currency. So it makes trade between our countries extremely expensive. Two, because we don't have infrastructure that is needed to facilitate movement of goods between countries. So ordering something from China and shipping it by boat is actually cheaper than ordering something from Cameroon and shipping it by road, all in the same Nigeria. So technically, people look at the opportunity cost and then they decide to go with the cheapest option. So Pan-Africanism is about ensuring that we become one as a people. We are one economy, and we have one politics to address the way the world interacts with us. That is the ideal of Pan-Africanism. And that is something we can only continue preaching and building by pushing for the reforms at different levels, the cultural reforms, the political reforms, the economic reforms that can eventually build that African that can withstand oppression and attacks from other parts of the world. There is always one thing that I say. As of today, if the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, the Europeans decide to reconvene a conference, let's say this time around they call it the Washington conference, or they call it the Kiev conference, and they decide that they are recolonizing Africa, can we fight back? Can we really fight back? Like, even our survival today depends on us having alliance with others as a continent. Like, there is no way the Americans or the Europeans, even when they come together, would dare say they will try to colonize China today. China is one country. But if they come together and decide to colonize Africa today, there is nothing we can do to stop them. Because for us to survive, we have to depend on either one. So how do we get to a point where we form one unified people and one unified nation? That's the ideal of Pan-Africanism.
Thank you. Let me say that there are people, especially in Nigeria, when things are very tough, they actually say that the Europeans, that they left Africa too early, that they should have stayed longer. I don't know if you, some people are even wishing that they should come back and recolonize Africa. But let me push on this issue of Pan-Africanism a little bit. I'll soon leave so that other people can come in and ask questions. I know that the AU, they had this agreement which they signed on paper that goods people should be able to trade with.
HCTA.
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know how well it's doing. And I know that some countries in Africa, like Ghana, Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, they now have visa-free.
Togo as well.
Togo, okay, that people can travel. Are there moves in the right direction? Why are the big countries in Africa not leading the role in this? I will not blame the big countries in Africa that are also showing resistance. I'll give an example, that of Nigeria. When the AFCTA summit, when the AFCTA was signed, Nigeria was one of the first countries that opposed AFCTA. At the time, I was frustrated about it until I decided to look more into why Nigeria was opposed to it. The fear of Nigeria at the time is that, hey, we are fine with the idea of exchanging goods and trading goods between one another. But before that, we need to put measures in place to ensure that an American company does not delocalize to South Africa and say that they are now exporting their goods freely to Nigeria and consider it a South African product. A Chinese company does not delocalize to Togo and now it's producing their goods from Togo and now they don't pay any duty fees to sell them in Nigeria. So how do we ensure that
the goods and services we are trading among ourselves are really produced by the people of those countries, and not Western and Eastern companies that we cannot actually compete with. So that will mean we are technically opening our market to everyone. So if you agree on having free trade among yourselves, but then in the agreements, there are no metrics to be able to to ensure that that does not involve Western companies opening a local branch, paying very poor salaries to the people in those countries and call them free trade zones, and exporting things they would have paid duties over as an American company, a French company, or a Chinese company, and now dump it on the local markets in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Kenya, and kill our local production and local entrepreneurship. So the big countries that are showing resistance, I understand them from that perspective. Free trade is agreeable and ideal for us, but that free trade should also ensure that we are protecting our market from co-optation by the countries that have more economic power to invest into industries that our local companies and industries cannot compete with. So that clarity is quite needed. AfCFTA is still a new baby. I think it's less than 5 years old, by the way. It's going to take a lot of time. And the first one is regulation. We don't even have a unified regulation approach towards trade. How Togo understands trade is different from how Ghana understands it, different from what Benin understands it, and so on and so forth. So there's fragmentation at too many levels, both in terms of regulation, but also when you look even closer in terms of industries. We don't have the same approach to different industries. It's going to take a lot of work for us to get there, but I actually appreciate the fact that the steps are already being taken, although they are still very baby step at this point. But that's the danger of it. When you have leaders most of the time that are more interested on how they stay the longest possible in power than they are interested in building nations that can sustain themselves in the next 50, 100, and 200 years. You have leaders that are only interested in what people call the stomach infrastructure. They are willing to use the country that they are ruling as the backyard of any foreign power that wants to control the rest of the region. So we still have leaders that do not have our interests at hand ruling our countries. So while some leaders are going in a certain way, preaching unity and wanting us to grow forward, there are a lot of traitors in the backyard that are also going to be smiling and saying, we want unity, we want solidarity between Africans, but they are opening their country to people to come and destroy their neighbors' economy as well. So it's a very difficult thing when it's like if you have a team, for example, as much as I'm not a football fan, but some of your players are actually playing for the opposite camp, and they are wearing your uniform, and you think they are playing for you, but they are playing for the opposite camp. How are you going to win under such circumstances?
Mm-hmm. That's very, very apt. Okay, so let me round up. We started this conversation by talking about the French-sponsored conference in Africa. I want you to imagine that you are sitting in front of Emmanuel Macron, French president. What will you say to him?
I will say to him, thank you. I will absolutely show him gratitude, because he has been probably the most useful French president we have had over the past 50 years. His arrogance towards Africans, his cockiness, I wouldn't use the term racism, even though I believe he's also racist, but his cockiness and his assurance in the stupidity and the inferiority of Africans has created has speed up the process of decolonization in African countries. Like, we have not seen as many African countries fall out of French control over the past 50 years as we have seen under Macron's rule. So some days I actually wish he can do a third term, because I believe that if Macron does a third term, by the time he completes a third term, the remaining countries that are still being ruled by puppets like Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, will also lose those puppets in power. So I can only express true gratitude, because he has been the most useful leader to our decolonization process.
All right, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I will just allow two people to be able to interact with you so that it won't be that I dominated the conversation with you. For those who are watching, Farida has some books that are published. You can find them on Amazon. I know some of you speak French, but there's one that is in English. This one, can you tell us a little bit about this one? This is the one that is in French. Let me put that, the English.
Okay. So, Melancholies of the Oppressed is rather, I think it's my only book that is focused on the practice of being an activist itself, because a lot of activism books are focused on how do you organize, or sometimes focus on ideology or the methods of resistance, but very little is said about living the life of an activist, living the life of a freedom fighter. The disappointment that you face in your journey, the fact that the people that you're even fighting for also fight you, or sometimes are the last one to understand your struggle, the fact that you speak a language that is not understood by even your loved ones, because they wouldn't understand why somebody would put themselves through so much harm in the name of fighting for an ideology. And the betrayals, the disappointments, the hopes, the gains sometimes as well, because there are victories in the struggle. So this book is about preserving the sanctity of activism, the values of activism, but also help any activist who reads it understand that they are not alone in this journey. And although things may seem difficult and always are difficult, they should continue their struggle. So that's why it's titled Melancholies of the Oppressed.
Yeah. All right. And then there is this one.
Yeah. This was my first book. It was written and published 12, 13 years ago. It's a book that I wrote at the time as a young adult. I think I was 21 or 22 when I wrote this book. And it was about helping any young person understand the different forms of oppression that exist in society. Political oppression, cultural oppression, religious-based oppression, economic oppression. Because growing up under a military regime in Togo, we have been ruled by the same family for the past 60 years in Togo, the oldest military regime on the continent. And the regime ensured that we were completely kept away from revolutionary and liberation literature. So there are certain literatures that I didn't even know existed until I left Togo. So because of that, even understanding that you are oppressed is very difficult, because you don't even know what oppression is. You are living it without realizing it. So through this book, I try to break down the different forms of oppression that exist and how they manifest, so that young people and people who read it can be able to access their own condition and be able to tell if they are being oppressed or not.
Okay. Now, this one is the latest, is it?
Yes, this one just came out 2 weeks ago.
Okay. And what is it about?
So, Les Insoumissions in English translates as in submission. These ones are reflections on ethics and values. The case that I'm making in this book is that before the political crisis and the economic crisis that we are facing on this continent, we actually are facing a deep moral crisis. Our society is losing values, and we can tie it to a variety of things. So it questions our values. What type of values do we need to be able to breed a free society where human dignity is respected? So through essays, I discuss things like equality, building equality in a society, how the state mechanism ensure that citizens are maintained in bondage, how citizens themselves replicate methods of oppression and abuse among themselves, even without the state participating in it. At the core is a revision of our a revision of our moral values and ethics, through which we can obtain liberation as a people. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let me allow just two people. I know you have to go. Let me allow just two people to make a comment or ask you a question. And I have Mr. James, who is joining us from the Gambia, and Femi, who is here in the United States. Mr. James, go. Request.
Yes, thank you very much, madam, for being our guest.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you indeed. I joined very late, but I do not know if you've been asked any question about the events in South Africa.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, please be kind enough to just make a few sentences about your opinion on what is going on in South Africa to enable you know what I have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because my perspective is different from that of the general public.
Okay. I have actually written a very long and detailed blog post about what's happening in South Africa on my Medium handle. So if you search my name, Farida Nabourema on Medium, you'll find it. My approach is also very different from what the general population has. I believe that social conflicts do not fall out of nowhere, out of entire coincidence. What is happening in South Africa is not peculiar to South Africa alone. Similar situations have happened in other African countries over the past decades that have been widely documented. At the core, it reflects the failure of the state to provide the very basic needs to their people. And when such situations happen, the political elites always find a way to blame it on those I would call the scapegoats, the migrants. Because the migrants, in many cases, are not politically protected. In some cases, they can't even vote. They don't have any political power. So it's easier to blame the insecurity, the lack of access of job, the poverty on migrants, instead of tackling the issue at the core, which in the case of South Africa is a capture of resources by a tiny elite that has held the wealth of the nation in its hand for many decades. But beyond that, there are also geopolitical factors in the specific case of South Africa that we are not also putting into perspective. I do not think that those who are leading the current xenophobic movement in South Africa are operating out of nowhere. Yes, there is already xenophobic sentiments that is in South Africa, which has a lot to do with the huge level of inequality that we see in Africa, the mass unemployment of young people in South Africa as well. However, it's too much of a coincidence that this is happening at a time where South Africa is also having some level of geopolitical fight with the US government and Israel, especially in the aftermath of the South African government literally taking a stand against Israel in the Israelo-Palestinian conflict, and the president of the US, Donald Trump, at some point even decreting that white people are facing genocide in South Africa. And then these xenophobic attacks emanate back on the public discourse and are leading to the kind of violence that we are seeing today without really much reaction from the South African political elite. So I would not claim to have proper knowledge, and I don't want to also fall into conspiracy theories, but I believe there is something there for us to look at too. Before we completely put all South Africans into the same basket because everybody is angry at them, rightfully so, we also have to keep some level of how do I even say it, objectivism in how we approach the situation in South Africa. But if you want to know more about what I think about the situation, I welcome you to read the article that I published about it about a month ago.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. James. Femi, any question or comment?
First, can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Bonjour, Madame Farida.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous?
Aujourd'hui? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. All right. It's not my first encounter with you. Just to let you know that some of us have followed you for a while.
Oh.
And I consistently listen to you the way I listen to David Udenyiwu. I think he was inspired by you, or you probably inspired each other. Same for Professor, is it Lumumba? Is his name now? But anyways, you've spoken to the facts about the system of government, and I can tell you you're speaking to the choir, because it's something I've consistently thought about. You've spoken about what resources in Africa, the minerals, especially rare earths, vis-a-vis the tech rate. As you can tell, I work in tech, and I know a lot about what's going on in that regards as well. You've spoken to neocolonialism. You've spoken to how Algeria and Guinea, without actually saying it out loud, got their way out. And in the case of Guinea, how they literally got destroyed because they wouldn't sign up to, I think it was Guinea or Guinea-Bissau. It had to be Guinea. How the French would not live without destroying a lot of their infrastructure that they claim to have built. You've spoken to the general influence across Africa. You've spoken to how what's it called? The insurgencies.
I don't want to rush you, but I only have 5 minutes left.
Okay,
Yeah, Femi, yes. You've
spoken to all of these things. All of these things. Now, one issue that Doctor raised earlier had to do with something that we consistently hear people, even in our forum here, say about how we need to take accountability as Africans, or in our own case, for example, outside of you as Nigerians or West Africans or Togolese or what have you. And we keep hammering it on people, those of us that see this thing beyond this point, that these influences continue into today in terms of the puppets in power. How do we go get this across to people, and how do we actually take this accountability? How do we get the grip grip on things amongst ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Femi. Farida, you want to take it, maybe Ovie can ask his question, then you can take the two together. Ovie, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Dr. Damenji. Ms. Farida, I appreciate your time, and thank you for taking us a history from where we are coming from and how we got here, not just about Togo, but the entire Africa. I look forward to your campaign for this office of the presidency in Togo in the nearest future. Now, I won't establish that. My question is regarding the future. As a Nigerian, I imagine Nigerian future coming of age and yielding power along this regional domain. What I mean is that taking over these regions, the neighboring countries under their influence, economically and politically speaking. That is what I will do in the future when I eventually get to that spot. I wonder if you talked about that already in terms of geopolitical influence, and taking the fact that the size of your country, not just your country, with what the Tinubu administration actually, the power it yielded a couple of months ago by intervening in the coup that was about to take place in your country. So have you, projected into the future about that?
Attempt in my country. You're confusing Togo with Benin. It's not the same country.
Oh, good. It's also served as an example as a neighboring country. So have you ever looked into the future that when a country like Nigeria eventually come of age, they will influence your either foreign policy, politically and economically?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'll start with Femi's question, and I think I'm trying to reprocess the question. Femi, can you help me?
Okay, just in summary, people often, whenever we, some of us complain about the influence, undue influence that we see across board, even from Saudi and UAE on the other hand as well. Let's not forget, and what have you. People keep thinking it's an easy thing to just push back on what's going on, and then they continue to say, oh, we need to take accountability. But I do not think it's that easy. How do we explain or make people understand and see beyond the shallowness of what they think? Because people do not know any better.
I get your question. Thank you very much for asking it. I think it's one of the most common things that we find in discourses over and over again. People automatically tell Pan-Africanists that, hey, you like blaming the West. Is it the West that is telling this politician to stash this amount of cash in his house? Or is it France that is telling this government from not cleaning the cities, and we are having how do you call them, flood in the area? So there are people who call it victim mentality whenever you bring out colonialism and neocolonialism, and they automatically tell you are living in the past, you need to move on, colonialism ended. I always say one thing, people don't realize that two truths can coexist. When you have malaria and you go to the hospital, you're going to have symptoms. You have a headache, you are throwing up. One doctor can say, let us give him anti-inflammatories, bring down the headache and the fever. The other doctor will say, let us actually give an anti-malarial and attack the plasmodium. If either doctor is convinced that only his approach is going to solve the problem, the patient may still die, because both are actually happening. Two truths can coexist. Do we have horrible leadership in our countries? Absolutely, yes. Do we have leaders that are looting our resources? Absolutely, yes. Do we have people who are completely incompetent who are running our countries? And most of the times we do. But does it erase the fact that our countries are also being looted by foreigners? No. We are being bled at two levels. And the reason why we are being bled at both levels is intertwined. On one side, the foreigners need to keep the incompetent people in place to ensure they can loot easily. Number two, they need to ensure that those incompetent people cannot be held accountable, because accountability will expose them and eventually lead them to change the rules of the games that are allowing them to collect our natural resources at a very lower price, far less than its value. On the other hand, they give them some level of protection and security. When they loot our resources, where do they take the money to? The Western banks. Where do they buy properties in? Those same Western nations. And recently, they are now also buying in Dubai and part of Malaysia. Who gives them protection when needed? It is the same countries who validate their fraudulent elections by sending in international observers that can very well see that the process was not transparent, but still make communiques to congratulate them for winning those elections. It is the same Western nations. So until we realize that we have both domestic and international enemies, and we waste our time fighting about which enemies is the best one or the worst one, or which one is even not considered an enemy and we should be focused on, we will never solve the problem. What Africa needs to realize and understand is that we need to uproot the current incompetent leadership, but we have to be careful by who, in terms of who we replace them with, because we can always change leaders and have the same result. A country like Nigeria has never had a leader stay in power for more than 10 years. A country like Togo has had the same family in power for 60 years. But both Togo and Nigeria have more than 50% of their citizens living under $2 a day, which means that the political change in Nigeria is not giving them the results that the Nigerians want, and which also means that the leadership in Togo is also not giving them the result that Togolese people deserve. So at the end of the day, what we need to get is to have leaders who at the core who have the people interests at heart. And number two, leaders that can be held accountable by the people, that can be removed by the people if the citizens are not satisfied with the result. So I try to avoid those debates because I feel like they are pointless. The people saying, no, the leaders are the problem, forget about the West. That I think is the most myopic way of viewing things, is refusing to look at the facts and the numbers and the data out there, but also saying, focus entirely on the West and leave those local leaders in place that are looting our resources is also not going to work. Till we understand that both systems are working together against us, it will be impossible for us to uproot them. And I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you so much. What about Ovie's question, if you remember? Oh.
Yes, I think his question is about leadership.
Regional dominance of Nigerian influence.
Oh, I wouldn't call it dominance because no country wants to be dominated by any other one, even if it's your neighbor. I would rather call it regional influence. Nigeria already had some level of regional influence for many years in the region. Nigeria had a lot of political power over other countries because it's the largest economy in the region at the end of the day. A lot of countries' economies depend on Nigeria. We import a lot from Nigeria in Togo as well. And when Nigeria shut down its borders to Benin and Niger for agricultural goods, their presidents were begging because it has a huge toll on their farmers as well. So Nigeria is already de facto a regional power, an economic power, and a political power in the region. by his population size, by the size of his economy, and even the size of his army. When Yahya Jammeh tried to overstay his welcome after losing the elections and Nigeria threatened to invade them, he didn't even wait for a week before he packed and moved to Equatorial Guinea. That's how powerful Nigeria actually is in the region. Now, world powers understand that Nigeria is powerful, which is why they also ensure that they have in power in Nigeria somebody that they can have leverage and control on. Because then Nigeria will have in power someone that is going against their interests, that person can influence the rest of the region and can support movements and leadership that can eventually uproot their businesses and economic models they're imposing on us. So they do everything possible to ensure that they still have control over who leads Nigeria. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Farida. I know you have to go. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully when we call you next time, you will come and help us understand that.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. So for those that joined, Mr. James, we are getting echo from your end. So whenever you're not muted, we hear echo.
Oh, is that so?
All right. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. And she had to go in 90 minutes, so we actually stretched it up to almost 2 hours. I'm sorry, but I'll get her back, and hopefully one day on our typical time. I just want to announce that in another 24 minutes, our guest for the regular 90 Minutes Africa today will join us, Dr. Salako. He became this year became editorial board member of the Tribune newspaper and a columnist for the newspaper. He's been on this show before, so he will join us, and we're going to talk about how, if it's possible, to have a healthy democracy without a vibrant opposition, independent judiciary, and a free press. So that will be.
Who got Tribune? Who got Tribune down here?
Sorry, what did you say?
Who's the owner of Tribune newspaper?
I don't know at this point.
I don't know what is the owner of Tribune.
I don't know at this point, but I know it was the family of Bafemi Awolowo before, but I don't know. You can never tell until you're close, then you know. All right, just so briefly, James, you want to say something, because we have to take a break and go to the next stream.
Right away.
It starts at 1:30, so it's about 20 minutes.
Okay. You better prepare for that.
No, if you, I can take just one comment from three of you, and then.
Anyway, she has spoken well. I just want to find out something. Is she a university lecturer?
No. She's in charge of an organization, human rights and rights.
Right. I'm asking because I'm a bit disappointed with Nigerian female university lecturers. I checked on the internet some time ago how many female professors we have. And I got I think the answer was 1,800 full professors who are female in Nigeria. You hardly come across any of them discussing issues of this nature. On what's called Hosseini Rufai's program and the other TV channels, I do not know of any Nigerian female professor that has come on board to discuss national issues. It's only the men. And even the men, even as far as the men are concerned, some of them live way below expectation. But however, I do not know of any female Nigerian professor coming on air to discuss the way this woman has discussed intelligently.
All right. Thank you, Mr. James. Femi.
Mr. James, let me take you from where you ended. I don't know how long you say you've been away from Nigeria, but I promise you, when I was in university in Nigeria, not just female professors now, the level of professorship has drastically fallen. I can only recall a couple of professors that I had and maybe a couple that were even doctors, even just regular lecturers that were just extremely brilliant. It's not the way it used to be. So do not even be surprised. But just to
thank you very much for your observation. Because when I left, it was people like Ade Ajayi, Professor Nuruddin Alao, Dr. Fonagoro, and others, Patrick Lemont, that were running the show. That is about 40 years ago. But what I'm seeing today, frankly speaking, is very appalling, terribly appalling. And this is one of the reasons why the country is badly governed.
Yeah. Okay. So, but just to quickly summarize, there was something I was driving at when I was in asking that question, Doctor, and of course she didn't have enough time. If you've listened to this woman previously as well, she's in cahoots with the likes of David Idene as well. She's there's more from where that came from. You've not even heard anything yet. She has a way of breaking things down, and even things that you'd never think of will quickly come to mind. And it was with her that I kind of like formed this stronger opinion about the fact that sometimes one seems to forget about how not just the French now, but some other entities, not just the US or UK and what have you, continue to do certain things, also in cahoots with Saudi Arabia and UAE, even in Africa, the same Africa, And of course, not it was because of her when I realized that the way the French left Guinea, for example, and I think I'd heard of the case of Algeria, wasn't. In fact, that's when I realized that Nigeria, maybe because we didn't fight for independence, we really did not like that, So that's some point I was just trying to drive at as well. But otherwise, I hope people that have now learned, somehow have learned or have added to their retinue of what they thought they know, that it's not as easy as the lizards are bad. They're there for a reason. And it's up to us to forget all these shenanigans of religion and ethnicity. How it's going to happen, I do not know. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ovie.
Well, nothing but respect and proud. It makes me hopeful for the future of the continent. Not just, our understanding about yesterday, but the process of how we get to where we are, and pretty much what is actually going on currently. So I'm very, very hopeful. I mean, throughout the whole time, I just shift to my student corner. I just begin to listen and, with all smiles. And so, yeah, I am not, I have nothing but respect for her. She is, she's way above her time. And with the way she's going, she can only inspire more, not just the women folks, but every adult in the room, as far as the continent is concerned. A grasp of how the system works is up to date. So, and thank you, Dr. Damiji, for doing everything to bring that there.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Doctor, please bring her back pretty soon, very soon, when she has time.
Okay,
very, very soon.
I'll do that. We are going to take a break. We are going to end this stream. We have another one starting in about less than 20 minutes. So please join us if you can. Let me just thank the people that supported us. Guy, thank you so much for your support. Rilke, thank you so much. And of course, Mwachuku, thank you. I appreciate all of you. I will see you at the other end of the stream. Thank you.
Tó fẹ́ kú torí ẹ̀ ọwọ́ ẹni ló fi ṣàánú kọ́ ayé la fi sílẹ̀ sí lọ́nà èyí yóò.
Sometimes they go as far as recruiting members of the family of an opposition leader just to discredit them. And in some case, they go full ballistic on the members of the family of these opposition leaders by arresting them, by abusing their family members, their children, their spouses. So it comes with a lot of fear when people realize that a member of their family is criticizing the government. Their response comes out of trauma, out of witnessing the way the government responds to people who are vocal against them. In my particular case, I will say I was a bit lucky. Lucky in the sense that my father himself has been a dissident for many decades before I was born, and my grandfather before him was also a dissident for many years before he was born. As a result, we have a track record in my dad's family of standing against autocracy, standing against dictatorship under the Nyasimbe and colonialism when the French administration was still in power. As a result, I had at least a moral support in my father. But unfortunately, it wasn't the case with the other extended family or even close siblings. There is this legitimate fear against the reaction of the government because they are convinced the regime will crush you, and they have succeeded at doing that in the past. Maybe it comes from a position of love, but I also feel like it comes a lot from a position of lack of courage and a position of cowardice.
Yeah.